Natalie didn't recognize the black car parked in front of her apartment. Long and elegant, with tinted glass, chrome details sparkling in the morning sun. She also did not recognize the tall, black, bull-like man who was standing on the side of the road, leaning on the rear passenger door. His clothes matched the color of the car, a black, well-tailored suit with a white shirt. He pretended to read a newspaper. Despite her dark sunglasses, Natalie could feel his eyes following her every move. Natalie smiled. She was used to this kind of attention because she was something to behold. Even today, dressed casually in skinny jeans and a New England Patriots t-shirt, she turned heads. Mostly thanks to her large, ample breasts, for which special thanks, Dr. Rothstein, which hugged the fabric of her t-shirt, and jeans that perfectly hugged every delicious curve of her hips, buttocks, and legs. Her long brown hair fell softly over her shoulders in waves as she grabbed 2 grocery bags from the back seat. Pinned the passenger door barefoot, she took one last look at the limousine driver. She felt that he was still looking at her, so she smiled brightly. No reaction. Maybe he really is reading this newspaper, Natalie thought, or maybe he likes men. She laughed quietly, then easily walked up the steps. What's a limousine doing on this side of town, she thought. This is the western part, maybe buying illegal substances. Natalie and her husband Joe didn't live in the wealthiest part of town. In fact, the area was quite run down. Natalie was a teacher, Joe was a paramedic. It was the best they could afford with their modest salaries. However, Natalie didn't think the neighborhood was bad enough for her neighbors to be drug dealers. Natalie opened the front door, then ran up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. Natalie exercised daily and was barely out of breath at the top, but her heart stopped for a moment. Not far from her apartment, the door was slightly open. Natalie was sure she had closed and locked it when she left this morning. It was needed in this area. Natalie slowly crept down the corridor. There were shouts behind the slightly open door, or at least someone talking in a very loud voice. Then she heard her husband's voice, but could not make out the words. At least not all of them. She heard one thing said in a pleading voice, "I will give you your money back." What is it all about? Natalie decided to burst in, loudly fiddling with the keys, slamming the door behind him, and loudly rustling paper bags with groceries. "Honey, I'm back," she shouted from the corridor. "Have you already woken up?" In the kitchen, Natalie found her husband Joe and 2 other men. She placed the grocery bags on the table as both men seemed to size her up. One was short, with curly hair and a heavy build. He looked like a nightclub bouncer. He only glanced at Natalie, then turned his attention back to Joe. The other man looked at Natalie much longer, slowly looking her up and down. Accustomed to being stared at in public, Natalie simply stood there, turning slightly to give him a better view, barely aware of this familiar yet daring act. His eyebrows raised slightly at the gesture. He was tall, had brown hair, green eyes, and was quite attractive. When his eyes returned to her face, Natalie smiled brightly. Without thinking, she bit her lip and lightly swayed from side to side, flirtatiously. "Natalie," her husband said, walking over and putting his arm around her shoulders. "These are friends from college, Eric and Bert." "Bruno," the shorter, heavier man said in a rough, unfriendly voice. He did not move from his place and barely nodded to her in recognition. His eyes never left Joe's. Eric stepped forward and took Natalie's left hand in his. "Natalia," he whispered, calling her by her birth name. "Joe told me a lot about you. If I had known that you were so attractive, I would have come to visit you much earlier. Nice to finally meet you." She watched as he slowly lifted her hand, his eyes never leaving hers, and kissed the back of her fingers. Natalie blushed slightly. "This is a gorgeous engagement ring, Joseph," Eric said, now turning his attention to the large diamond on her finger. "And your wife is a magnificent woman. You made a great choice." "Oh, thanks. You are too kind," Natalie said, withdrawing her hand, and with it her feelings. "Will you stay long? Would you like me to make some coffee?" "No, no," Eric said, patting Bruno on the shoulder. Bert and I were just leaving. The short, stocky man tensed slightly, then headed into the corridor. Eric followed him. 2 weeks, Joseph, Eric said, turning in the hallway and holding up 2 fingers. He didn't hold his fingers out like a peace sign. The fingers were clenched. He pointed them to his forehead and tapped twice, repeating, 2 weeks. When both men left and the apartment door closed with a noticeable thud, Joe slumped onto the table. He covered his face with his hands and sobbed weakly. Joe, Natalie turned to her husband, hugging his shoulders. She felt his body tremble. Joseph, dear, what happened? Oh, nuts, I screwed up big time. What happened, dear? Tell me. Joe still had his hands in front of his face. He shook his head. I can't. Joseph Michael Durant. Natalie took his wrists and pulled them down. I am your wife. Every problem you have is my problem. Now tell me what problem we have. Joe avoided eye contact even after she dropped his hands. His gaze was directed downwards. When she said the word, we, she said it loudly for emphasis and lifted his chin so he looked into her eyes. Tell me, Joe, she whispered. Joe sighed heavily. I owe this guy money. Who? Natalie asked. Eric. Hi. I owe him a lot of money. How many? $3,000. What? How? I mean, why did you borrow the money? Natalie hoped the question didn't sound judgmental, but in fact, she suddenly became angry. For you, Joe shuddered. For me? Natalie asked, trying to understand what Joe could spend that kind of money on for her. Your wedding ring, our honeymoon, your car. Natalie began to understand. She knew Joe wasn't a rich man when they met, but he had a heart of gold, was boyishly attractive, and loved her very much. She didn't ask how he could afford her engagement ring, but she was surprised when he appreciated it at $6,300. She vaguely remembered him saying something about an inheritance when she asked where he got the money for the honeymoon. This seemed plausible at the time, as his parents had recently died in a car accident a year before they met. Darling, we got married almost 4 years ago. How long did you have to? Exactly 4 years. Loan term. I owed more, I paid it off. But time is up. Natalie felt the air leave her sails. She sat down on the table next to her husband. Honey, everything will be okay, she said, trying not to sound depressed. We'll figure something out. Joe's mood worsened every day. He became more and more distant from her, both emotionally and physically. Natalie barely recognized him and couldn't find a way to reach him. Every evening after dinner, Joe's phone rang. He looked at the screen, his face turned pale, and he left the apartment to take the call. Natalie knew it was Eric. She checked the call log on Joe's phone on the second night of this pattern. She hated spying on Joe, but he hadn't been completely honest with her in the last 4 years either. Natalie tried to think of options, but even she admitted that things weren't looking good. They had no family to turn to for money and few friends who were not equally strapped for cash. Late Friday morning, 5 days after Eric arrived at their home, Natalie decided to take matters into her own hands. While Joe slept after a night shift at the ambulance, she took his phone and scrolled through his recent calls. She pressed redial on the last number. It was Eric's name. Joseph, I'm very glad you called me. Do you have my money? Eric's voice sounded like a snake through the earpiece. This is not Joe. This is Natalie. After a short pause, Eric's voice changed from a hiss to a purr. Ah, Natalia, it's a pleasant surprise, but very unexpected. Natalie sat with the phone pressed to her ear. She twirled her wedding ring on her finger, taking it off and putting it back on. Eric seemed interested in the ring when he was at their home. She inhaled, held it for a moment, and then exhaled. I want to repay my husband's debt to you, Eric, she sighed, closing her eyes. Do you have money? Asked Eric, his voice sounding surprised. No. Then I don't understand how you can. Natalie took the ring completely off her finger. She didn't like the way her hand looked without it. She put the wedding ring back on. I'm sure if I come to you, Eric, Natalie said, we can work out something. Ah, I see. There was silence on the phone. Natalie began to doubt that Eric would accept her proposal. She was almost ready to blurt out, "I'll make this worthwhile for you," when Eric finally spoke. "In 1 hour. My driver will be with you in an hour." "Thank you, Eric," she whispered into the phone, and then immediately regretted it. What was she thanking him for? Damn, what did she even offer? She didn't think for a second that she could just talk him into forgiving Joe's $3,000 debt. And Natalia, despite the circumstances, Natalie found his pronunciation of her name charming. His voice sounded full of promise as he said this. She hated the man, but she liked his manners, at least towards her. "Yes?" "Bring your wedding ring," he said. "Why, yes. Yes, sure. I'll bring it." When she disconnected the call, she breathed a sigh of relief. Her hands were shaking. She raised her hand with the wedding ring and looked at him. Well, that's all, she thought. He obviously wants a ring. This is our ticket. I'll give Eric the ring. It should pay off Joe's debt. Natalie took the ring off her slender finger and tried to imagine Joe's reaction when he found out she'd given it away. How will he feel? Will her students at school notice his absence? Her fellow teachers? "It's just a thing," she said finally. "But things can be replaced." Natalie looked longingly at the ring. She put it back on. "But I don't want to get rid of it," she sighed. "There must be another way, something else Eric wants." Natalie knew exactly what else Eric wanted besides her ring. She remembered how his eyes had looked at her hungrily a little over a week ago. But was she ready to give it to him? Natalie spent the next hour getting ready. She took a long, hot shower, thoroughly washing every part of her body. Her thoughts sometimes wandered to Eric, to his tall physique, angular features, those deep green eyes. Natalie felt the minutes slipping away. She had to choose clothes, as well as hair and makeup, all without waking Joe. She really hoped to return home before he noticed her absence. Natalie rinsed off, turned off the water, got out of the shower, and dried herself with a towel. She wrapped herself in a towel, then tiptoed past Joe into the bedroom. She quietly slid open the double doors of the closet. She went through different outfits, skipping her work clothes. The conservative image of a fourth-grade teacher was not suitable for this meeting. She was now looking through her outfits for Friday night dates. One of the things she and Joe did at her insistence was date night every Friday. Sometimes it was dinner, sometimes dancing, sometimes just a trip to the beach. Natalie wanted to keep the magic of the honeymoon alive by getting each other out of the house at least one night a week for a real date. So far it has worked magically. She felt like they were still on their honeymoon. Her hands settled on one of her favorite outfits, a little black dress. It was dangerously short, but something she liked to wear in public with Joe on one arm. "Oh, what are you doing, Natalie?" she said out loud, hanging the dress back on the hook. "You're not going to dance. You're going to decide on a business deal." Still, depending on the deal. Her hand lingered on the dress. "No, we're not that desperate yet." Her hands went back to the more subdued outfits in her closet, the ones she might wear to a parent-teacher conference at school. She grabbed a beige pencil skirt from one of the racks, a red short-sleeved blouse, and a pair of black high heels. The skirt fit tightly around her hips. The shirt was made of elastic fabric, at least a size too small, which simply emphasized her curves, and the shoes were slightly provocative. The outfit was professional, but also something Cameron Diaz would have worn in Bad Teacher. Foundation, concealer, blush, eyeshadow, eyeliner, mascara, powder. Natalie quickly mastered the makeup ritual. She had just finished when she heard a soft ringing sound from the kitchen. She looked at her watch. Hour. It would be Eric's driver at the entrance, signaling her arrival. Natalie took her purse and ran to the kitchen. She pressed the intercom button and said, "Yes." "Your transport has arrived, miss." The voice was deep baritone, like the host of a late-night jazz radio station. "I'll come down now." Natalie took one last look at herself in the living room mirror. Attractive and professional, she thought to herself. Her whole body was shaking with anticipation. Anticipating what, she didn't quite understand. And absolutely seductive. Natalie said out loud, laughing. In case it comes down to this. In the next room, she heard Joseph stir. Natalie quickly left the apartment. She walked down 3 flights of stairs to find her driver, Eric, waiting patiently for her in the lobby. It was the same tall black man she had seen leaning against the limousine outside their apartment last week. She opened the door, smiling sweetly, and said, "Hello, I'm Natalie." He lowered his sunglasses onto the bridge of his nose and looked Natalie up and down. Natalie had the distinct feeling that he approved of what he saw, and she felt proud of her outfit. It will work. So if it works for my limo driver, Natalie thought with an amused smile on her lips, it will work for Eric. I'm Bull, he said, pushing his glasses back into place. Are you sure you want to do this, miss? What exactly? Natalie asked. She herself was not entirely sure what she was going to do. The bull made a short, grunting sound. Natalie thought he would leave the conversation there. Mr. Brazarn Schmidt, the person I'm taking you to today, he has the ability to change the people who come into his circle, he finally said. Sometimes, as in my case, it's for the better, but that's not always the case. Oh, I see. Well, I'm not going to join Eric's circle. I'm just closing the deal my husband made with him. Natalie raised her left hand and waved her fingers so that Bull noticed the shine of her wedding ring, as if that explained everything. It seemed to work because Bull simply nodded. The car is waiting for you at the entrance, miss. Natalie followed Bull as he walked along the path in front of the house. She let him take a few steps forward to get a better look at him. He was tall and athletic. She could imagine him as a gym teacher, even though she couldn't see his body under the suit. He was smartly dressed and polite, and Natalie immediately felt comfortable in his company. She felt as if she had a personal bodyguard. Bull opened the back passenger door of the limo and took Natalie's hand, helping her settle inside. Natalie slid into the middle part of the seat, but then noticed that she couldn't see ahead. The partition behind the driver's seat blocked the view. Natalie guessed that one of the buttons in front of her lowered the divider panel. She pressed one, and the partition began to descend with a motor hum. Bull sat down in the driver's seat and momentarily met her gaze in the rearview mirror. I like to see where they take me, she laughed nervously in explanation. Bull nodded and started the engine. Natalie opened her purse and took out a compact mirror to check her makeup. She hadn't put on lipstick yet this morning. She rummaged through her purse for her favorite shade. It was called Allure. It was a slightly darker shade than her classic red, which gave her lips a classy look that wasn't too kitschy. Natalie caught Bull's gaze in the rearview mirror several times. Perhaps he still loves women. She licked her lips and smiled. Bull shook his head and went back to driving. Natalie giggled quietly. While putting on makeup and teasing the driver, Natalie lost track of where they were going. They drove out of the city center, and Bull had just opened the private entrance gate. She looked out the side windows as the car drove down a very long driveway. On both sides of it were well-groomed lawns, and beyond were dense forests. Eric loved privacy. The car stopped in front of a huge mansion. The Bull got out of the car, and Natalie turned around to look around. But it was impossible. She had no idea where she was. Bull opened the door and again extended his hand to help her out. I'll drive the car back, said the Bull. He pointed to the front door. Just ring the doorbell. Mr. Joe Schmidt is waiting for you. Walking along the flagstone path, Natalie looked at the house with wide eyes. She guessed there were easily over 30 rooms in this house. It was more wealth than she could have imagined. This is Bruce Wayne's wealth, she joked to herself as she pressed the button by the door. The door opened, but Alfred was not there. In fact, there was no one. Natalie watched as both doors closed on their own behind her. It would have been creepy if the mansion had been dark and gloomy, but it wasn't. The entrance area was huge and brightly lit, with the sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end of the room. The ceiling was 30 feet above her, and large, curved stairs rose on either side to the upper balcony area. Ahead, corridors branched left and right, with even larger rooms on this level. Hello? Natalie called, not seeing anyone in the immediate vicinity. "Ah, Natalia," Eric's voice came from the balcony above. "You are as beautiful as when you first met." Eric walked down the stairs. He was dressed simply, gray and black trousers and a white collared shirt. When he reached the end of the stairs, she held out her hand for a handshake. Eric moved her hand to the side, then kissed her softly on both cheeks. "This is how we greet a lady where I come from," Eric said in a thick accent, taking her arm and heading towards the room at the main entrance. "We will hold our first negotiations in the office." Natalie wanted to ask what he meant by first thing, but she was still a little embarrassed by the kiss on the cheek. "Where are you from, Eric?" "Frankfurt, Germany," he replied, "even though I've lived in the States since I was 17. "Did you come with your parents?" Natalie continued small talk, looking at the impressive works of art in the hall. "No, I came alone." They entered an office with a large oak table, several easy chairs, a sofa, and large armchairs. Eric directed her to one of the couches and sat down next to her. "Now, Natalia." Natalie put her hand on Eric's arm. "Can I say something first, Eric? I like the way you say my name. Everyone calls me Nat, Nats, or Natalie. You're the only one who calls me Natalia, and I like the sound of it. This name suits your beauty." Reflexively, Natalie squeezed his hand. "Thank you. You are very kind. Now, when you called me, you said you wanted to settle your husband's debt. However, you also said that you have no money?" "Yes, straight to the point. My husband tells me that he owes you $3,000. You asked me to bring my ring, so I think you already know what I'm suggesting." Natalie began to remove the wedding ring from her finger. Eric stopped her. "Natalia, Joseph told you that he only owes me $3,000. Eric looked truly concerned. "Why, yes," Natalie stammered. "Is it not true?" Eric looked worried. He got up from the sofa and walked over to the table. He opened one of the drawers, leafed through it, and pulled out a spiral notebook. He brought it to the couch and sat down next to Natalie. Eric opened his notebook to the last completed page, about a third from the end of the notebook. He pointed his finger at a line in the middle of the page. "Your husband owes me $48,932, he said calmly and quietly. "What?" Eric flipped to the beginning of the notebook. His fingers skimmed across the page, stopping briefly at the dates, amounts, and notes scattered neatly across the page. $3,000 due now. It was a 4-year loan, opened in December 2013, a few months before you ran away. I think Joseph used the money to buy your engagement ring." Eric pointed to a few lines on his notepad. "It's compounding interest on a monthly basis. That's $7 to $500 for your Hawaiian honeymoon due this June. Several small loans. If I remember correctly, it was for Christmas gifts, new clothes. Something about Friday night dates. Some trips to the Caribbean. Oh, and a big loan for your new car. You see some payments here and there, but barely covering the accrued interest. Don't worry, the big amounts don't come until next year. At the moment, only the amount of $3,000 is worth the term." Natalie leafed through the book and suddenly realized the desperation of her and Joe's situation, and she realized something else. All this money was borrowed to buy her things. They lived far beyond their means just because Joe wanted to treat her like a queen. Natalie was shocked. She couldn't find the words. "Natalia, let me ask you." Eric took the notebook from her, closed it, and put it under the sofa. Then he gently put his arm around her shoulders. "If it were only $3,000, what would you be willing to offer me to clear this debt?" Natalie looked at her wedding ring. She began to remove it from her finger. Eric put his hand on her arm, stopping her. "The truth, Natalia. When you told me on the phone that we could work something out, what did you mean?" Natalie chose her words carefully. She wanted to lie, she wanted to run away and cry. But no, this is not entirely true. She wanted to tell Eric the truth. "I was going to let you sleep with me," she whispered quietly, looking at her hands. I see. 1 hour of your company in my bed will erase $3,000 of your husband's debt," Eric said. Natalie nodded, devastated. The look you gave me at home. Something in that look suggested that you might be interested in me. Oh, really? But Natalia, even you should know that this is many times more than experienced girls earn by selling their bodies. Do you think being with you costs so much in such a short time? Eric took the wedding ring off her finger. He turned it in the light coming from the western windows. Natalie thought he would put it in his pocket, deduct 3,000 from the notebook, and let her go. But his next words surprised her. Natalia, I admit, you intrigue me, he said. Not only your physical beauty, which is beyond words, there's something else about you. He paused for almost a minute. I'll tell you what. Eric leaned closer and whispered these words in her ear. 3 hours, 3 o'clock. 3 hours in my bed will erase $3,000 of your husband's debt. In her mind, Natalie immediately imagined the scene in the bedroom with him. Natalie shook her head to clear the thoughts that came to her too quickly. Eric's soft whisper in her ear tickled her ear and sent shivers through her entire body. In 3 hours, Eric continued to whisper, turning the ring in his fingers before her eyes. I will give you a choice. My driver will take you home, have time to cook dinner for your husband, or you will spend another 45 hours with me to cover the remaining 45,000 of your husband's debt. Eric spoke slowly, calmly. A scene flashed through her mind of her cooking in the kitchen, stirring a large pot of meatballs. How would she feel if she cheated on her husband? Would she tell Joe? This will keep us busy until Sunday evening. Your husband's debt will be completely paid off by you just by spending a weekend in my company. Then I'll give you another choice. Stay the night. Sunday night. My driver will take you to school in the morning, and I will send you to work with $20,000 in cash in your purse. Yours only for spending the night with me voluntarily when you no longer have any obligations. Natalie thought about that amount of money. What will it look like? And all she has to do to get them is let this man, this handsome, muscular man, be intimate with her for the next 72 hours. 1 hour, 3 hours, 48 hours or more. Does it matter? After all, she had already said it herself before. She was ready to let him sleep with her. She expected it to be a quick act, but what were a few extra hours? It's just sex, no matter how long it lasts. Natalie looked at the ring sparkling in Eric's fingers. She never wanted to lose this ring, a symbol of Joe's love for her. Eric offered her a way out, and while she didn't have the exact numbers, she suspected Eric was right. $1,000 an hour was probably a lot more than most call girls made. But if you add it all up over a weekend, that's exactly what he was offering her. I didn't bring spare clothes, Natalie said out loud, mostly to herself, but mentally considering the possibility of staying the night. What will they do for so long? Eric seemed like a great man, but she didn't think he or any other man could have sex for 48 hours straight. Eric shrugged. We'll find time to go shopping this weekend. This gave Natalie a lot of comfort. This meant that she would not be confined to Eric's bedroom for the next 2 days, although this had a certain unnerving attractiveness. Yes, of course, they will have to take breaks for food and rest. They couldn't just have sex continuously all weekend. And had Eric just asked her to go shopping? What will she say to Joe? What explanation can she give for not coming home for the weekend? Maybe she will only stay for 3 hours. This will cover their current debt. She and Joe could find a way to raise the remaining money later. She would return home to cook dinner for Joe, and it was date night. Joe would have taken her to dance and would have had no idea what had happened here. Rules. Natalie thought to herself. She was a 4th-grade teacher, after all. There should always be rules that need to be set and followed. 1. No kissing. Julia Roberts had it right in Pretty Woman. Kissing means people are interested in each other romantically. I won't kiss him. 2. Just sex. I won't even pretend to enjoy it. 3. I won't call him sweetie, darling, or any of the other pet names I call Joe. 4. Home by 4 o'clock, no matter what happens. Joe and I can find a way to earn $7,500, and the remaining amount will be until October. Okay, Mr. Disserschmidt, Natalie said, quickly accepting the last rule. If this was a business transaction, she would call him by his last name. 3 hours, 3 o'clock. Let's go to your bedroom. Eric expressed no emotion about the news. He put the wedding ring back on Natalie's finger. I want you to wear this, Eric whispered in her ear. Once the ring was fully in place, his hand slid up her left arm, leaving a trail of goosebumps in its wake. I want you to see it on your finger. His hand slid up the length of her arm and rested on her shoulder. I want you to know that you are a married woman. Natalie looked at her wedding ring. She was a married woman owned by another man. Her last thought was about the words of the bull. Eric knows how to change the people who enter his circle, sometimes for the better, but not always. For the better, Natalie whispered when she found the words. I have changed for the better. What? Asked Eric. Natalie turned to Eric. I think we have 2.5 hours left. Why don't you take me to your bedroom? Eric chuckled, gently taking Natalie's hand and guiding her down the wide hallway of the mansion. His touch was confident but not overbearing, and she felt her heart beat faster. The walls of the corridor were decorated with paintings, which, as Natalie suggested, could be originals by famous artists. They walked past several doors before stopping at a massive oak door. Eric opened it, and Natalie saw a room whose grandeur was breathtaking. In the center stood a large bed with tall carved pillars and a canopy. The room was filled with soft light from several lamps placed in the corners. Eric closed the door behind them and turned to Natalie. His gaze was penetrating, and she felt her body begin to tremble under his attention. Are you sure you're ready for this? He asked quietly. Natalie nodded, although a storm of doubt was still raging inside her. She knew she was doing this for Joe, for their future. But the price she had to pay seemed too high. Eric took a step forward, gently grabbed her chin, and raised her face, forcing her to look into his eyes. Remember this ring on your finger, he whispered, and know that this is just a business. You repay the debt, and that's all. Natalie nodded, feeling his warmth and the smell of his cologne. She knew this moment would change her life, but she couldn't afford to back down. Eric slowly leaned down and kissed her. It was not a passionate kiss, but rather a sign of respect and gratitude. Natalie closed her eyes, trying not to think about what would happen next. Time seemed to slow down, and every moment lasted an eternity. Eric was gentle and attentive. He took his time, and his actions were filled with a feeling that she did not expect. When the time was up, Natalie felt strangely relieved. She had kept her end of the bargain, and now Joe's debt was paid off. She looked at Eric, who got dressed and sat next to her on the bed. You can stay if you want, he said softly, but I won't force you. Natalie knew she had a choice. She could stay the weekend and get $20,000, but she knew there would be consequences. Thank you, Eric, she said, getting out of bed and getting dressed. But I need to get home. Eric nodded, understanding her decision. He walked her to the door and called the driver. As Natalie got into the car, she felt her heart finally calm down. She did what she had to do for Joe and their future. She got home in time to cook dinner and spend date night with her husband, as they always did. Joe knew nothing about her sacrifice, and she decided it was best this way. She saved her family and their future, and that was the main thing. A few months later, Natalie noticed how Joe had changed. He again became the loving and caring husband he was before. They found ways to cut costs and start saving money so they wouldn't end up in those situations again. Natalie knew that her action was not heroic, but it was necessary. And in the end, she realized that her love and loyalty to Joe was what really mattered. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.